What would it take to build a truly resilient local food system? And Jane Goodall just made a speech today that said humanity will be finished if we fail to drastically change our food systems in response to the coronavirus pandemic and the climate crisis. And she's one of many, many people who have been speaking out saying this is a moment of real significant change. My belief is that the 2020s is the most crucial decade in the history of our civilization. We have so much we really have to change because the urgency of pressures is really big, as you'll see. So I want to sort of just give a quick overview of the kind of thing we're covering so that people are just tuning in at the beginning and get a sense of what we're talking about. We're talking today about regenerative organic farming, doubling BC's food production, farm villages, regional growers, cooperatives, limiting the control of retail supermarkets, community food hubs, 5,000 farm rangers for COVID-19 recovery, climate recovery, soil restoration, biodiversity recovery, and strong farm incomes. And so just to give an example of what's possible, La Ferme des Quatre Temps en Quebec is an astonishing example of success for small-scale organic farming, where Jean-Martin Fortier had already had a successful farm of his own when he was approached by a billionaire to help him develop a model sustainable farm. So they have 8 acres altogether, and they're earning $100,000 crop value per acre per year, with a profit margin of 40%. So each acre, after paying the workers, is generating $40,000 in profit per acre for the farm operator or the owner. He has 12 workers there. They're averaging 1.5 workers per acre, but they have a combination of land, capital, organic farming skill, and business skills. They're really putting all the pieces together to show that, yes, this can be done. So a profitable organic farming business model does exist. Can we ramp it up tenfold? That's the question. Another example, in Normandy in France, La Ferme du Bel-Helois was established by Perrine and Charles Hervé Grouillet based on Elliot Coleman's work and their knowledge of permaculture. So they have a 20-acre farm, but they're specifically farming 1/4 acre to see what they can do on it. So what you're seeing in the picture there is the 1/4 acre. 1,000 square meters, organic, biointensive, permaculture, and regenerative. No machinery except hand tools and a horse. They're grossing $84,000 off that 1/4 acre. The take-home profit after all their expenses, including paying their worker, is $29,000 a year for 43 hours work a week, 4 weeks vacation. And their carbon sequestration, because they got a lot of science on this, is 6 times greater than a forest will be doing, and far greater than normal agricultural conventional farming, which is losing soil, obviously. So it's just some close-ups of what they're doing, inspired by not just Elliot Coleman, but the 19th century maraîchère parisienne, when Paris was self-sufficient in food. And they've done their homework and gone back to look at the methods the farmers used 150 years ago. They have an overall 120 hectares, but the average French farm of 120 hectares generates 1 job per farm. They're generating 3 jobs per hectare, which is 360 times more jobs per hectare than an average farm, and generating far more food. These are stunning numbers. And this is their methodology. The 40% of the acre is under intensive greenhouse using bio-intensive methods. And they have raised beds, they have permaculture methods all the way through. There's their horse. There's some of their crops, just to give a sense of the diversity. There's some of the land. That's the full farm crew who are working on the full larger farm, not, only on the 1/10 of an acre, the 1/4 acre rather, they just got, 1 worker. So Perrine says you won't get rich in money. So the big investors go away, but you'll get rich in food, jobs, quality of life, climate, community, soil, biodiversity. She said she wanted to recreate the model imaginary dream farm from her childhood. And that's exactly what she's done. She's also inspired by Elliot Coleman, his on 4-season harvest, his winter harvest work. And while I'm at it, I just give a plug for the movie, The Biggest Little Film, that's on Netflix right now, which is another great example of restoring a totally trashed piece of almost desert land into a biodiverse, realm using regenerative farming. So the 7 core solutions in a quick summary, so you know where I'm going on this one. Number 1 is a 10-year transition out of capitalism. He says very casually and easily. A 10-year transition to regenerative organic farming. A cooperative food economy, access to farmland, a fair trade code of conduct for retailers, community food security, and pandemic food supply planning. So I'm going to do some other stuff first and then come back to all those to give you a sense of the flow through my presentation. So in the global context, we have a climate emergency. The level of carbon dioxide has just shot up to an unprecedented level, because of what we're doing, burning all the fossil fuels, tearing down all the forests. And that's the astonishing increase, and the temperature is rising in accord because carbon dioxide traps heat as well as the other greenhouse gas emissions. Agriculture is responsible for 25% of this, meat and dairy for 16%. And when we look at the future temperature where we're going, the models are quite outrageously scary. If you think you've understood climate change and haven't had that awful sinking feeling in your belly, you haven't really understood what we're facing here. Because lurking behind the COVID emergency is this huge global climate emergency where there's no place to escape. You can't go to an island and say you're all clear of the virus. You cannot get clear of climate. One of the initiatives that's relevant to regenerative farming is rebuilding the soil. Just a 4% increase in soil carbon is sufficient to offset the current emissions we're putting out. And so this issue of building the soil instead of tearing it apart with conventional farming is a critical part of regenerative organic farming. And as Anita said earlier, farm folks themselves have been involved in starting Farmers for Climate Solutions, putting this stuff together so that farmers can begin to understand how they can contribute to climate solutions. We also have a biodiversity emergency. Global insect collapse of 25% just in the last 30 years. Without insects, we get no pollination. 87% of all plants depend on insects for pollination. Without insects, we have no food. Insects are the critical piece that holds it all together. In particular, the caterpillars. What plants do the caterpillars need to feed on? If they've been killed off with pesticides, they can't pollinate. So these things really hang together. And ecological overshoot, where we've got this accumulated ecological debt. Primary causes, burning fossil fuels and agro-industrial farming. A loss of topsoil. A third of the soil is, acutely degraded. We're in danger of looking at Dust Bowl conditions of the 1930s because of the loss of topsoil, and only 60 years left at farm. If soil degradation continues and we don't adopt regenerative farming, which can rebuild the soil, we're in big, big, big trouble. There's water pollution from all the dead zones, from all the chemicals being washed away from farming. And then the true cost of global farming has been estimated to be $3 trillion a year, and all the external costs that conventional economics never measures. We also have a crisis of gross economic inequality and anger, people struggling to feed their families. And we have a pandemic-linked collapse with people feeling increased food security. The rush to buy seeds and to buy bedding plants and get planting is a measure of that, but a lot of people don't have the money to do that. So basically, capitalist farming is destroying soil, ecosystems, biodiversity, water resilience, carbon storage, and farmers' incomes, and rural communities. But capitalism is not, one of my big understandings, it's not an economic system, it is a cultural system based on self-interested values expressed in the economy through the use of capital. When we change our culture to cooperative values, we build a cooperative economy based on the economics of kindness. Capitalism farming is destroying the planet. Its bankers and CEOs are following a rule book which says that money matters more than food. That's the only rule that fundamentally matters for big investors who are determining the future of all these big agro-industrial corporations. So the 2020s is the most crucial decade in the history of our civilization. This is the turnaround decade. We have to tackle this thing. If we want to double world food production, we don't need GMOs and complex chemicals. We just need to return the land to small farmers, where we have greater yields and greater everything good. This Rodale Institute did a side-by-side trials for 40 years. They showed yields are similar. Greenhouse gas emissions are smaller, energy needed is smaller. So now let's look at that was the global context. In a North American context, we have domination by giant multinational corporations. Since 1990, the giant corporations that supply farm inputs and services have left farmers with just 5% of farm revenues, causing farm debt to nearly double to $106 billion since 2000. The farmers are really struggling. Between 1985 and 2016, transnational agribusinesses were the primary recipient of US farm revenues, capturing 98% of farm revenues going to the big agribusinesses, 2% to the farmers, who are going into debt and facing bankruptcies. 2018 saw the lowest realized net farm income for Canadian farmers in 12 years, seeing a 40% decrease in net farm income since 2017. This comes from Jon Steinman's book, Grocery Story, which I'll come to later. The supermarket's markup on food rose from 18% until 1980 to 67% in 2018. In 2005, Safeway took $2.5 billion in vendor allowances, with vendors paying up to $30,000 per product. It's like a mafiosi system. Either you pay us or we won't stock you at all. And then you've got no supply outlets because the supermarkets dominate 85% of all the retail foods outlets. Processed foods are controlled by just 10 players, the big ones in the middle. And organic foods are dominated by multinationals like Coca-Cola, Campbell's, and Conagra. Since 1995, the number of independent organic food processing companies has fallen from 81 to just 15. So they're also following a corporate domination scenario here. Now in the British Columbia context, getting more to the local, my first question, you can get ready to answer this. BC has 2.59 million hectares of farmland. What percentage is growing vegetables? So Julia, there's the survey. You get to fill in your score. I'm not gonna, and then 5 seconds to think about it. Fill in what you think, what percentage is growing vegetables, and then submit. You're probably going to get it right because you're a very highly food intelligent bunch of people. And the answer is, ta-da. Okay, most of you thought it was 2.4%. Some, it was varied around. I'll close that. The correct answer is 0.25%. 53 times more land is growing hay than is growing vegetables. Yeah. Out of 17,500 farms, only 5% are organic or in transition, only 1.4% are using community-supported agriculture. Clint Mullenix reckons that half of BC's agricultural land reserve is unused, growing nothing. In the Alberni Valley Regional District, in their 2010 agricultural plan, they found they got 7,700 hectares, 3,000 hectares being actively farmed, 4,500 hectares lying idle. 90% of what is being farmed is livestock production or food for livestock. 3% is vegetables, berries and grapes, and the region is importing up to 95% of its food. Average gross farm receipts, $61,000. The farmer keeps 8 cents of each dollar of produce sold, so they got $4,000, $600 for all their overhead costs. Average farm operator in 2010 was 54 years old, so if other things haven't changed, they're 64 years old today, looking for something to do with their land, not knowing what to do. So meanwhile, our food chain is hugely dependent on imports. On Vancouver Island and elsewhere, 95% of all our food comes in by truck or by ferry. And just-in-time food management means that in the event of an earthquake or something like that, on whatever, we only have 2 or 3 days food supply. Food Secure Canada, just a week ago, 2 weeks, said it is critical that decisions made now, when system change is finally understood as not only possible but necessary, we lay the foundations for resilient and equitable food futures, notably in the context of climate change and the ongoing collapse of biodiversity. And COVID-19 is still spreading, raising concerns about BC's food supply if it spreads among poorly paid, poorly treated migrant farm workers. On this particular farm in America, 4 days ago, every single worker was found to have COVID on the eve of its harvest. So BC has the land, we have willing young farmers, so what's the problem? It's cost of land, lack of farmland housing, lack of skilled labor, lack of capital to develop farm fixtures and equipment, lack of infrastructure through shared warehouses, coolers and storage, and I should say a lack of belief in profit, that it's hard to compete with industrially produced food. But the 2 farms I showed earlier show that that's actually not true. So together, let's call for policies that are good for farmers, good for people, and good for the planet. Basically, I'm talking about building a new ecological civilization based on the economics of kindness. And this is something I'm not going into now. The 5 principles of economics of kindness are: be kind to nature, be kind to people, build a cooperative market economy, not a corporate economy, democratically strong government, and suppress domination, which I'll come to. It's about replacing ego with eco. in our understanding of the planet. And basically, you can find all this work on my website at thepracticalutopian.ca. So back to the core solutions. The first, a 10-year transition out of capitalism, is not something I can go into now. But basically, we're looking at the need for a planned legislated transition to a purpose-based charter for every business operating in BC, requiring they operate for the benefit of all stakeholders, including nature, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, that requires political leadership and support from a political party able to bring that through. So I'm going to move on from that because that's otherwise a big distraction. Next is a 10-year transition to regenerative organic farming. So regenerative farming is really all about the soil. And David Montgomery has been writing about the soil for ages, right? Basically, you know, when you partner with nature, you protect the soil, you build diversity, you're having a holistic approach to life, you're sequestrating carbon, you're storing water, you have more cover crops, you don't plow the soil, you don't destroy the worms, you're doing things in a different way. You're minimizing soil disturbance, maximizing crop diversity, keep the soil covered, maintain a living root system year round, in particular by not plowing, and you're integrating livestock. And so the more you build organic matter, the more you store water in the soil as well, which means organic farms have more resilience in drought periods, and we're going to have more periods of drought. Less nutritious, conventional agro-industrial farming gives us all these things. Regenerative organic farming restores the soil, the carbon, restores farms' incomes, restores biodiversity, multiple positive impacts. So we need government leadership. There's Lana Popham, organic farmer, and there's John Horgan, who knows how to use a wheelbarrow. These two people hold the key to getting the government on board with what we need to talk about here. And we also need community leadership from below, because the two have to go hand in hand. The one cannot work without the other. So number one, the Ministry of Agriculture needs to establish food resilience and sustainability task force to develop an overarching regenerative food policy, to enact a Food Resilience and Sustainability Act with legally binding targets for regenerative farming, local food production, supply chain resilience, farm wages, retail sector partnerships, public health, and other things. Number two, we need an agricultural land reserve to protect agricultural land and encourage farming. And the good news is we've got it already. We're the envy of North America. And having done this piece, if we hadn't got it, there'd be no farmland left in the whole Fraser Valley. It would all be subdivided. Number three, we need a tax on pesticides. To phase in a tax on chemical pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, fertilizers, and transfer 100% of the income to support farmers as they make transition to organic regenerative farming, because it takes 5 years to rebuild your yields, because you've got to take soil from nothing to being rich and full of carbon and microorganisms. Number four, we need a tax on high fat, salty and sugar food to sort of reduce consumption of that. Number five, a tax on food advertising with exemptions for sustainable foods. Number six, an ecological land value taxation. So we're looking at phasing in income and property tax reductions for regenerative methods of farming that are known to increase soil carbon storage and biodiversity. And to do that, you've got to have some system of certification with an independent body that says, yes, this farming is using that body, this method, tick the box, get the tax incentive or the tax reduction. Number seven, we need food procurement policies so that universities, schools, hospitals, correctional facilities, seniors care homes are all incentivized or required by law to do X percentage, 20%, 50% local food, bring kitchens and chefs back into universities, schools and hospitals, and require contracts to apply the sustainability dietary guidelines. Number eight, we need regenerative farming education and research to expand agricultural extension services. This is all government stuff that can be done top down, especially training for biointensive, organic, agroecological, permaculture, regenerative systems of farming. Number nine, we need to find ways to encourage a reduction in meat and dairy to tackle the climate emergency and the biodiversity crises, because meat and dairy have a big responsibility for the crisis, the mutual crises. And number 10, we need to have government support for regional growers, cooperatives, and community food hubs with 3-year funding for hired staff people to develop regional cooperatives and food hubs all around BC. Which brings me to the third key solution, which is building a cooperative food economy. My model here is Finland. Population very similar to BC, 5.5 million. It is the world's most cooperative economy. They've got 5,500 cooperatives. 84% of all adult Finns are members of at least one co-op. 17% of Finns work for a co-op. Their agricultural cooperatives have a market share of 97% in milk, 80% in meat. Consumer cooperatives supply 45% of people's daily goods. 50% of all Finns are members of the cooperatively owned S Group, which includes 650 restaurants, 503 grocery stores, 433 supermarkets, and a massive grocery logistics center, the envy of cooperative, of farmers around the world. So in British Columbia, with 5.1 million people, we have 72 agricultural and food cooperatives. It's a beginning, but they're all very small. We need 29 regional growers cooperatives, one for every regional district. So what does a regional growers cooperative do? It's Discovery Organics, run by my friend Randy Hooper and Andy Moss. They are tackling a corner of this by organizing 47 growers together to enable them to have market access by working together. But there's a heck of a lot more that a co-op can do. So it's, say we imagine one in the North Okanagan. All the farmers are members. There are 2,400 farms, over 69,000 acres. 51% of the land is not used for farming. So an imaginary North Okanagan regional growers cooperative would share business skills, farming skills, and mentorship among the members of the co-op. It would arrange shared supply management and shared distribution central co-op so that everyone's not suddenly all growing garlic so there's a glut in the market and the price falls. We know where there's a shortage of kale, where there's need for garlic, where there's opportunities for peas, where there's opportunities for leeks, and we plan that together. We have shared transportation, shared storage, shared processing, and shared seed security. We had shared marketing and advertising and shared CSA distribution to help farmers expand their CSA stuff. Shared access to capital, or access to capital through community investors in the Okanagan region or the Fraser Valley region or Vancouver Island, wherever it might be. Shared research and development, cooperative grocery stores, and shared lobbying to have political influence. And just as a plug here, FarmFolk CityFolk is already doing some of that work in helping spread the net for CSAs to help the farmers to help get the customers. So we're building the community-supported agriculture network. So what else is possible in community economic development with building a cooperative economy? So the CED network works on this sort of stuff there. It does channel investment from the community level through to farmers. In Nova Scotia, provincial equity tax credits focused on community benefit have inspired people to invest $100 million in 76 projects, including substantial investments in food. So they have a system set up channeling investments into their farmers. In Portland, EcoTrust invested $25 million to buy 2 old industrial buildings as a hub for bioregional food and farm systems, and to sort of enabling 170 food businesses to share warehousing, share cold storage, and have cargo bike delivery into Portland's diverse food ecosystem. They're cooperating to make this stuff happen. In Quebec, the Chantier supports 11,200 social economy enterprises, employing almost 250,000 people, including a lot of support for social enterprises working on food and farming. So then we come to the big BC problem, which is access to land. Look at these land prices. This website didn't include the Fraser Valley. The highest price they have is the United Kingdom at $16,000 an acre. In Fraser Valley, it's up to $186,000 an acre in Canadian dollars. How can young people possibly buy farmland in BC? Up in the Quesnel, it's for 400 acres, it's still $1 million. In the Nine, where I did recent search, so that one farm, which is farm, the top one is 21 acres, it's 59,000 an acre. The lower one is 5 acres, $300,000 an acre. My solution is farm villages. I believe they're the way of the future. It also gets people back onto the land. Throughout the world, in every culture, farmers have lived in small farm villages for 10,000 years. This is in the Philippines. There's examples all over the world. My proposal is that the ALR rules are changed, allowing that on any farm of more than 20 hectares, 1 hectare can be rezoned to allow a limited amount of clustered housing for farm workers. The immediate, I'm going to go into the details in a minute, the immediate pushback I get is, oh, that acre of land, that's prime agricultural soil, you've got a farm on it. At the same time that out of those 2.59 million hectares, 1.25 million hectares have no farming happening on them whatsoever. But by allowing farm workers to come on the land, you allow that kind of bio-intensive farming to happen. If you had a community farmland zone, would allow the development of clustered farm worker housing with strict controls to ensure that the land is farmed and never bought for conventional real estate purposes. It's governed by a community farmland zone bylaw, a covenant registered with the land, strata farm fees that do not apply if the land is farmed. If you stop farming, you've got hugely huge fees, and registration of a housing agreement restricting residential units to farmers and their families. So you imagine a piece of land, there's your 40 hectares, 25 hectares, there's the farmer's house, and there's his road, that's all farmed. You take one little corner, you build a farm village, or even a cluster of 5 homes to begin with. The cost of land is not market sensitive. The only people looking to buy this are farmers. So say it costs 100,000 for that 1 acre, that's 20,000 each. Cost of a small starter self-built house, 150,000 each on the generous side. Total 170,000. Mortgage comes to $620 a month. They can then lease or purchase more land from the farmer. And if the farmer's growing older, there might be some transition arrangement. The same, I just mentioned those levels of protection to ensure that the zone is not abused, because we do not want, realtors and developers finding a loophole in this and saying, oh, well, we pretended we'd farm for a year, then we got sick, we can't do it anymore, so my granny's moving in. In the Alberni Valley, where there's 4,500 hectares of vacant farmland, you could have 100 farm village clusters, each of 45 hectares. If you assume that's 11,000 acres, if you assume that 50% could be cultivated, 1.5 jobs, that's 8,000 potential farm jobs growing bio-intensive organic food for a good profit on land sitting, doing nothing at the moment. The ownership could be either private rental from the farm owner, because the owner would build the houses and rent them, or as a strata title owned by the farm workers, or a community land trust which would own the land and the farm workers would own their homes and be able to pass them on in inheritance. Operating models, it could be a shared farm business or a cooperative, it could be individual farm partners, they could be employed farm workers. They'd be allowed income from farming, value-added products, educational courses on farming, and farm holidays. So, survey question number 2, would you like to live and work in a farm village? And there's your 4 options. And you get now to vote. Dum-de-dum-de-dum-de-dum, and the result is... Yay! So 10% of you think, oh, it'll never happen. So that's 4 or 5 of you. 10% think they want it, you like your city life, but you've got a lot of keen would-be farmers here. So I'm going to close that and move on here. I have to just click there. There we go. Did I miss one? No, there we go. So moving on. A fair trade code of conduct for retailers. This is normally never discussed in the discussions on food policy and stuff like that. Jon Steinman's book, Grocery Story, is an absolute revelation. He has done phenomenal homework. He's on the board of directors of the Kootenai Co-op, and he really knows his stuff. And the understanding you'll get about the power of retailers from reading his book is just tremendous. In BC, 5 chains, Jimmy Patterson, Sobeys, Walmart's, Costco, and Loblaws, control 85% of all the retail outlets. Roosevelt, back in 1938, said, if you believe with me in private initiative, you must acknowledge the right of well-managed small business to expect to make a reasonable profit. You must admit that the destruction of this opportunity follows concentration of control of any given industry into a small number of dominating corporations. And that is exactly what we've got, not just in BC, but in the whole of North America. Jon Steinman says, market power at all levels of the food system has dealt significant harm to the women, men, and families producing and harvesting our food. So I'm in the retail code, which would be, obviously negotiated with the retail stores, but with the government that ultimately could actually put stuff in place so that all retail stores are on a level playing field and no one's disadvantaged above the other. You require a percentage of fresh produce to be local. and of value-added produce to be local. No slotting fees, perfect food standards, delayed payments, promotional allowances, long-term contracts, retroactive penalties, price competition penalties, or other strategies used to maintain mafiosi-type power over suppliers. And then look at in the 1930s, America passed these two acts. One which allowed food makers to set the minimum price their products are sold at in stores. The other which guaranteed that small grocery stores access to the same products at the same prices as large chains. Those were the legislation in America during the 1930s to build the strength of the farm economy. Moving on to number 6, community food security. This is a measure of the community food activities in Vancouver. This is where we have a lot of stuff going on, and it's really encouraging. So I'm imagining every city and urban area or whatever has a community food hub with wide membership, voting membership, participating membership, because they've got work to do. We also need government welfare, work and income policies to address food poverty and security. Stuff we can't do at the local level. We need to have government changes on that stuff, and they have to happen through political pressure. So if your community food hub has got 10,000 members, you can mobilize them to put the necessary pressure on, whether it's to get basic income, whether it's to increase welfare rates, whatever it might be, to get those policies changed. As well as that, a community food hub can get Ecology 101 and farmland education in all schools, K to 12. We can get Dig for Victory campaign, province-wide, to grow food in front and backyards. We can have community root cellar, a juice press and tools library, community allotments, community food festivals, CD Saturdays. We can transform food banks into community food learning centers. And we can have community food enterprises. So all that stuff is possible if we really are organized. And one of my proposals is that the government would finance someone to be the staff person for 2 or 3 years to make that happen, to work with all the existing social activities and enterprises and pull them together into a membership-based community food hub. Soul Foods in Vancouver is a great example of social enterprise and what can be done when you put people together, on vacant land that was sitting growing concrete for years and years until Michael Abelman came along. Now Jobs for All, and in Dockside Green in Victoria, just the same, where Top Soul Eat Local, that's before and that's after. These opportunities are just sitting there waiting for social enterprise to get involved. So finally, number 7, we come to pandemic food supply planning. I have just been involved with the GTEC Council for Green New Economy in publishing this thing called the Portfolio of Possibilities. One of those possibilities, this is being submitted to the government just 2 days ago, is to employ 30,000 young people as recovery rangers to help with BC's economic recovery. And that includes a proposal to hire 5,000 farm rangers to work on BC farms this summer. There are 89,000 young unemployed people at the moment in BC, under the age of 24. If they can't get work, and once you've been out of work for more than 6 months to a year, you lose spirit, you lose contacts, you lose references, you lose skills, you lose everything, and you've got to keep people working. So this will be to let people get onto the farm, paid by the government, and participating in farm ranger democracy, so they're included in discussion, with ongoing mentoring, ongoing learning and tuition. We also need to prepare for food supply chain disruptions with urgent measures to assist people on lower incomes who can't afford to stockpile or buy higher prices. If we had a situation when there's so much collapse of food supply in America that the trucks stop crossing the borders, because the people in Minnesota and Idaho and Washington say, no, we need that food for ourselves, you can't have it, Canada. It's the lowest income people who suffer the first, who are on a week by week, budget. We need to expand local BC food production. So all of the above, the stuff I've been talking about. And then how about paying farmers $2,000 an acre to grow food, not hay, on vacant farmland? And then raising the annual revenue requirement for tax reduction on classified farmland between 2 to 10 acres from 2,500 to 10,000. So that farmers who are getting a tax reduction are incentivized to pay more serious attention and not just exchange eggs or sheep with their neighbors, but really get more serious about growing food. And then we need to improve conditions for BC's migrant farm workers who are, because of the very difficult conditions they live under, they're more at threat of COVID. RAMA is the Radical Action with Migrants, is a grassroots justice group in the Okanagan that works with their 5,000 temporary immigrant workers to improve their working conditions. And then because a lot of this stuff is likely to clash with the free trade agreements, we need to explore what are solutions to the legal implications. Free trade agreements make no allowance for a pandemic, and they accord no importance to the resilience of local and regional food supply chains. We cannot sacrifice human lives and the stability of our society on the altar of shareholder value maximizing free trade. So how can we do it? And I'm literally 1 minute from ending here. So key groups to do with food security and would meet together. Decide on the top priorities from what I've shared and everything else, turn them into a manifesto, get 100,000 people to sign on and besiege every politician in BC and do it within a month. Now is the time to get policy changes moving. The 2020s is the most crucial decade in the history of our civilization, and we're now 6 months into the first year. Other people are busy on Zoom calls developing new policy in exactly this kind of way. It's up to us. We're the ones who have the ability to make this happen. Politicians' desks are too busy. We have to do it for them and then put it to them. Dream of this future, imagine it, make it possible. That's how all great things start. You've got to visualize it and make it happen. Dream it, plan it, do it. And a final survey question. Do you think that taken together, these ideas could build a truly resilient local food system? Yes, they could. Or maybe if there was enough support, and no, they're politically impossible. Over to you. Da-dum, di-dum, di-da. And the answers are, well, there you go. 96% of you think they either could, they could if there was enough support. Only 5% saying no, politically impossible. So way to go, you folks. I will close that. And that's my book, a novel that I wrote set in the year 2032, which visualizes what this future can look like with 2 chapters set on a farm covering doing all this exact same stuff. And that's my website, The Practical Utopian, where you can find other of my, explore my ideas and stuff like that.